Nicole has long accepted the fact that her only family was her grandmother. In the life of her granddaughter, Miranda Martin took on the roles of both a mother and a father, whom the girl hadn't had since she was born. The woman put all her strength and energy into raising Nicole, trying to surround the girl with love and care, which is what her parents would have done. Mrs. Martin was an excellent cook, which made her granddaughter crazy about her delicious meals, and this time wasn't an exception. Nicole came home from school and barely had enough time to take off her backpack when she smelled the divine aroma coming from the kitchen. "Grandma, what are you cooking? It smells so good," the girl asked without hiding her admiration. "Oh, I baked your favorite apple pie, so go wash your hands and come to the kitchen," Mrs. Martin said and began to set the table. In less than a minute, Nicole was already at the table, eating the delicious treat prepared by her grandmother. Mrs. Martin watched lovingly as her granddaughter finished off her piece of pie, clearly signaling that she would love to have some more. God, she looks so much like Hannah. The same blue eyes and silky hair. It's too bad she can't see you now, the woman thought with a touch of sadness. The fact was that Mrs. Martin's daughter tragically died when Nicole was only 6 years old. By the evil twist of fate, the life of the young mother ended in a car accident, which didn't leave her a chance at surviving. The girl never knew her father, and her grandmother kept this topic off limits. According to Mrs. Martin, her father left Nicole's mother when she was in her second trimester of pregnancy. Back when she was alive, Hannah Martin preferred not to talk about her daughter's father or the kind of person he was. Hannah met him while she was living and working in New York. However, none of the relatives knew the reasons that prompted Hannah to return home a year after leaving for the big city. Some people said that it was too difficult for Hannah to get used to the frantic rhythm of the metropolis, since she grew up in a small town, while others believed that it was unrequited love that was the cause of her return. But be that as it may, this story didn't have a happy ending. Little Nicole often asked her mother about who her father was and why he never came to visit them. Unfortunately, the girl's questions never got answered since her mother died very young, and her grandmother had this topic forever off limits. Raising her granddaughter, Miranda Martin couldn't help but think of the time when she first became a mother. Moments like this made the woman tear up, while her heart began to ache treacherously. It's worth saying that Nicole never gave her grandmother a hard time. The girl studied well at school, and she was actually good at all subjects, but she especially loved mathematics, which she was very good at. "You could take my place when you grow up," Miranda Martin said, smiling. The fact was that the woman worked as an accountant for over a dozen years and was considered one of the most valuable employees at her company. "Wow, and I will have my own money? And I'd be able to go to New York, just like my mother?" Nicole exclaimed with fervor. Hearing her granddaughter's plans, Miranda Martin hurried to run away so that the daughter couldn't see tears frozen in her eyes. Such a reaction was caused by the fact that Miranda still remembered all too well the time when her daughter started dreaming of moving to New York, enticed by the promise of a beautiful life in the metropolis. Mrs. Martin understood that if Hannah had stayed at home, then perhaps her life would have turned out very differently. Therefore, the woman tried her best to teach her granddaughter to love the house that she grew up in. As a part of her plan, Mrs. Martin tried to get the girl to join her in the kitchen, realizing that cooking skills could come in handy for her later in life. Nevertheless, Nicole didn't spend all her free time with her grandmother. Therefore, just like any other sociable girl, Nicole had many friends, but one of them, Amanda Stevenson, deserves a special mention. It was this friend that made Mrs. Martin especially anxious. That was because Amanda had always been an uncontrollable and reckless child who caused a lot of trouble for her parents. "Oh, I hope she doesn't rub off on my Nicole," thought Mrs. Martin, who really didn't like the ostentatious independence of her granddaughter's best friend. Several years flew by. From a cute little angel, Nicole turned into a beautiful young woman who made men turn their heads on the street. It was getting harder for Mrs. Martin to find common ground with her liberated granddaughter, who was becoming more and more like her mother with each passing day. In her youth, Hannah Martin was a very freedom-loving woman who dreamed of a life full of adventures. Thus, deep in her soul, Miranda Martin knew that she was wrong trying to get her granddaughter to stay by her side. One day, having returned home from a walk, Nicole said, "Grandma, I want to go to New York with Amanda. She says that she has already found a job for us, so there shouldn't be any problems with housing or employment." "Sweetheart, I wouldn't hurry to leave home if I were you. You're still young, and the big city is full of temptations." Mrs. Martin objected, trying not to notice her own voice trembling. Despite her best attempts, Mrs. Martin realized that she was unlikely to be able to persuade her granddaughter to stay, since she had actually made up her mind a long time ago. "But Grandma, I'm an adult now. Don't worry. I will call you every day," Nicole added and looked at her reflection in the mirror with a satisfied look. Okay. If that's something you really want, it's fine. Just don't tell me that I didn't warn you," Mrs. Martin answered quietly. It only took Nicole a couple of hours to pack, and soon she was all ready for the journey of her life. Moreover, she already got a bus ticket for the next morning, which proved that the young woman was dead set on her plan. The night passed in anxious anticipation, and with the first rays of the sun, Nicole was already standing at the door, her bag in her hand. Mrs. Martin kissed her granddaughter on the cheek and quietly slipped a few rolled-up $100 bills into her purse. The woman knew that her granddaughter could use some extra cash in the new city. Soon, Amanda came for Nicole, and the woman called a cab and went to the bus station. The young travelers felt like they were on the verge of something new, something that would turn their lives upside down. Unfortunately, both women were in for a surprise, as New York did not welcome them warmly. The frantic rhythm of life and the abundance of neon shop windows stunned and confused the young woman. Settling in the big city wasn't as easy as Amanda had imagined. And if the woman didn't manage to somehow solve the housing issue, finding jobs turned out to be much harder. Tired of the endless trips to random offices, Amanda and Nicole went to a cafe to get a bite to eat. In the cozy atmosphere, the friends immediately felt comfortable and looked around. There, you see, at the counter, two handsome men. One of them is wearing a Rolex. Can you imagine? I bet that they are rich, Amanda said with a smile. Nicole, however, didn't see anything special about the men sitting at the counter, and so she signed for the waiter to bring her another cup of coffee. However, before Nicole even realized what was happening, Amanda was already sitting with the men. Nicole smiled knowingly and took a sip of the tart drink brought over by the waiter. At that moment, a young attractive man sat down next to her, smiled cheerfully, and asked, "Are you busy?" Nicole smiled back and graciously allowed the stranger to stay. As it turned out, the man's name was Brandon, and he worked at an auto repair shop on the corner of Main Street. It's worth mentioning that talking to him, Nicole felt an inexplicable lightness and ease, as if they had known each other for several years. Unfortunately, the woman didn't get a chance to enjoy the conversation for long because Amanda took her by the hand and dragged her out into the street. "What's that you're doing? He's poor. Can't you see that? Trust me, I have an eye for these things. And those guys are stockbrokers, and they have money," Amanda hissed in the ear of her friend. "Oh, come on. I don't care. I better go back home. I have an important interview tomorrow, and I want to look my best," Nicole answered, taking her friend's hand off of her. Amanda only shrugged her shoulders resentfully in response and went back into the cafe. And Nicole went to the motel to rest and get a good night's sleep. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual and looked at Amanda dead asleep with an ironic smile. Her friend only came home at around midnight. After a quick breakfast, Nicole dressed in her best clothes and headed to the firm's office for her interview. After telling the assistant that she was there to see the director, the woman took a deep breath and pulled open the door. To Nicole's surprise, the director was a pleasant woman of about 45 who listened attentively to the candidate. "You see, I desperately need this job. The truth is that I came from a small town and I really don't want to go back. Nicole added, looking carefully at Mrs. Brown. Yes, of course, I get that. Many of us go through something like this at some point. Sure, you don't have any experience in sales, but on the other hand, experience is something that you can get on the job. Thus, I'll give you a chance, Gloria Brown answered with a smile. Then she handed Nicole a copy of the employment agreement and showed her the place where she needed to put her signature. As Nicole bent over to sign the document, she saw something that made her heart beat faster, and her cheeks instantly turned red. Is something wrong? Mrs. Brown asked sympathetically. This photograph, the framed one on your table, where did you get that from? Nicole asked, her voice trembling. And what does it matter? Gloria asked with obvious irritation in her voice. It's my childhood picture. I'm 5 years old in it. Only my late mother had this photo, Nicole whispered. Hearing Nicole's words, Gloria Brown immediately turned pale and tears filled up her eyes. God, this just can't be happening. Nicole, is that really you? The woman asked, tears flowing down her face. Nicole looked blankly at the director, waiting for an explanation. As it turned out later, Gloria Brown was her father's sister. However, she also knew her mother and grandmother well. And why have I never heard anything about you? And what happened to my dad? Nicole asked in surprise. Unfortunately, your dad died of an incurable disease 7 years ago. And Mrs. Martin deliberately didn't let me get in touch with you, so I wouldn't move you to New York, Gloria Brown explained. Having learned the truth, Nicole gave her aunt a long hug, trying not to pay attention to the tears flowing down her face. Now that the woman had learned the secrets of her parents, she felt much better. Together with Mrs. Brown, Nicole went to visit the grave of her father, who never got to see his daughter. It's hard to even explain the range of feelings that were filling up the woman's heart, since she'd been deprived of her father's attention her whole life. Since Gloria Brown didn't have kids of her own, she devoted all her love and attention to her niece, whom she immediately grew to love. A few months have passed, and the life of the young woman from the small town had changed beyond recognition. One day, after much debate and conversation, Nicole and her aunt finally visited Mrs. Martin, who, deep down, had been waiting for this meeting for a long time. Moreover, Nicole shared the fact that she now had a man in her life. His name was Brandon. It was the same mechanic from the auto repair shop who wasn't afraid to come and talk to her at the cafe. This encounter was probably destined to happen, and even Mrs. Martin's skepticism couldn't interfere with their relationship. A year after they met, Nicole and Brandon got married, which made both Nicole's grandmother and her aunt very happy. This event was especially emotional for Mrs. Martin, who believed that her daughter was watching the newlyweds from heaven and was glad that Nicole had found her happiness.